Thank you very much, Mary Ann. And in the interest of having ample time for ongoing discussion, we'll move directly to Nancy's presentation. And it is my pleasure to introduce Dr. Nancy Cantor, Chancellor and President of Syracuse University. Nancy's well known for her work on the public mission of universities, a topic on which she lectures and writes extensively, along with intertwined issues such as rewarding public scholarship, sustainability, liberal education, and the creative campus, the status of women in the academy, and racial justice and diversity. She's the co-chair of the Central New York Regional Economic Development Council, a post to which she was appointed by New York Governor Andrew Cuomo. Prior to her appointment at Syracuse, Nancy served in numerous leadership positions in higher education, including provost at the University of Michigan and chancellor at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. She's a prolific author, holding a PhD in psychology from Stanford University, and is recognized for her contributions to the understanding of how individuals perceive and think about their social worlds, pursue personal goals, and how they regulate their behavior to adapt to life's most challenging social environments. She's on a host of memberships of professional associations and boards. I'll turn you over to Dr. Nancy Cantor, who's modest, as you see.
Thank you, Wanda. It's wonderful to be here, to join you all, and especially to be with my dear colleagues with whom I've worked over the years on these issues. So when Dr. Ward organized this panel, she asked me to give some examples of on-the-ground relationships between innovation, participation, inclusion, and the notion that we can put our science to work for the public good. And so that's what I'm really going to be talking about today. So as we gather to align our agendas, and should I use?
Oh, yes. That's the clicker.
Okay.
That way.
I'm actually going to go back so I don't get lost here. I apologize for reading, but I want to keep time here. So as we gather to align our agendas for excellence, I want to begin with the very basic proposition that an innovative society and an inclusive society go hand in hand, and that we cannot solve our world's grand challenges without full participation by our entire talent pool, women and men together. If we can create a richly inclusive and strongly innovative ecosystem, it will yield benefits for both knowledge production and social and economic prosperity. To paraphrase the words of the summit organizers, making science and innovation both socially responsible by engaging the talents of both women and men, and socially responsive to the needs, goals, and perspectives of both women and men is the best way to advance solutions to the range of problems we face in arenas as perplexing as our environment, our health, our economies, our cultural conflicts, our aging populations, our educational systems, and more. The problems we face are all of ours collectively, and the solutions will only come from all of us collectively. A fully aligned agenda for excellence, I would argue, must have three elements working in concert, each synergizing the other. It requires full participation across the diversity of talent in our societies. In turn, this sharing of diverse perspectives, insights, and talents produces the highest quality innovation and research, and this innovation and research, built on a foundation of diversity, will spur the most successful problem solving on the largest challenges of our day. I've tried to illustrate this recursive cycle in this very simple schematic that comprises really the central point of my discussion today. These are all part of the same cycle. They feed back to each other. We can't think about inclusion, whether it's gender or underrepresented minority groups, we can't think of that separately from the quality of innovation and research and the quality of the problem solving we do. But we have many myths about thinking about it separately. So, It's not a new idea that the best way to tackle complex problems is to bring diverse perspectives to bear on them. But it's easy to forget this, because so often our success stories focus on individuals. Historically, of course, these were men portrayed as heroes who pulled themselves up entirely by their proverbial bootstraps and, defying the odds, succeeded in solving some great puzzle. We name breakthroughs for them. We sometimes even call their findings laws, imbuing them with immutability. But as the late sociologist of knowledge Robert Merton reminded us, the discoveries of Newton, Faraday, Hooke, Kelvin, and so many others, scientists who we tend to regard as solitary geniuses, were inseparable from their social context. Indeed, in 1961, on the 400th anniversary of the birth of Sir Francis Bacon, Merton pointed out that Bacon saw science as a fundamentally communal endeavor, dependent upon, and I quote, the accumulating cultural base and the concerted efforts of men, at that time, of science, sharpening their ideas through social interaction. Today, doing science that is both socially responsible and socially responsive requires deliberate attention to attracting talent and to building that inclusive ecosystem of innovation. And it's probably fair to say that this task is even more complicated than when Bacon and others gathered together. Northwestern University economist Benjamin Jones has even built an econometric model, there's one of those for everything, I guess, of this challenge in his aptly titled article. The article's titled, and I quote, "The Burden of Knowledge and the Death of the Renaissance Man. Is Innovation Getting Harder?" Hence the little men in this thing. In answering yes, he recalls Isaac Newton's famous aphorism that, and I quote, "If one is to stand on the shoulders of giants, one must first climb up their backs, and the greater the body of knowledge, the harder this climb becomes." Indeed, it will be impossible if we cling to individualist myths of how innovation actually happens, especially if we default to the prototype of the solitary male genius. The complexity we face is simply too great, and the stakes are too high. Grappling with today's messy problems requires that we reach out broadly, not just across universities, but across the public, private, and nonprofit sectors, as well as across and with our communities, to bring to the table what we like to call the full community of experts we need, with women and men, of course, of all generations and perspectives. As we build this inclusive innovation ecosystem, we must do, however, more than just climb the mountain of accumulated knowledge. We must practice creative information sharing and problem solving in diverse groups in real time, often embedded in the context in which real life unfolds. As the eminent scholar of civic engagement, Harry Boyd, points out, such practices would not only yield better science, but the process itself, which he calls civic science, would also help us build social cohesion in our often too fractured worlds. So creating opportunities and structures for full participation is a matter of smart business, as several people have said here today, as well as social responsibility. Full participation almost always produces better and more creative thinking, better decisions, and more trust in public problem solving. History shows this, as do decades of academic research. And let me just give a few examples. A good illustration can be found in the work of Sam Summers, an experimental social psychologist in the U.S., who's explored the relationship between group composition and group performance in the context of jury deliberations. He studies mock juries as, and I quote, "a realistic and engaging means for examining group decision-making, as participants are forced to work together to evaluate ambiguous information and reconcile their interpretations of it." This is a paradigm that can be used in any field of academic, scientific, or public decision-making by groups. Summers has compared, for example, the working and thinking of racially homogeneous juries with those that were diverse and concluded that, and I quote, racial diversity is likely to lead to improved group performance, including more complex thinking and creative problem solving, and this is very important, on the part of all group members. The quality and fairness of trial by jury, as an example, is a keystone in public trust in the legal system, as we all know. As a consequence, it would seem self-evident, as the U.S. Supreme Court Justice Thurgood Marshall once wrote, and I quote, that when any large and identifiable segment of the community is excluded from jury service, the effect is to remove from the jury room qualities of human nature and varieties of human experience, the range of which is unknown and perhaps unknowable. It's not necessary to assume that the excluded group will consistently vote as a class in order to conclude, as we do, that its exclusion deprives the jury of a perspective on human events that may have unsuspected importance in any case that may be presented. Now, I would argue here, and that's why I use this example, that it's not a stretch to believe that this is true for all groups, whether it's scientific laboratories or whether it's in an industrial context working on important societal problems. Indeed, when people who've been considered outsiders, or in fact not considered at all, in our very large talent pool are invited to the table, to the lab, or to a public problem-solving session, they can bring new ways of seeing the situation, different categories of thinking and finding solutions, and new ways of analyzing cause and effect. In addition to what the newcomers bring with them, the dynamics of the group itself will change, sometimes even before they arrive. As the work of Catherine Phillips in organizational behavior has shown, even the anticipation of the presence of an outsider makes the insiders in a group, and I love this, working on a common problem, think better and do better work. So all those guys in our labs are going to do better work when they think that we will succeed in bringing more women into the laboratory. Now, this is actually extremely important in the day-to-day workings of how we get creative problem solving and innovation. But what's really important is how to make that diversity work. So at the same time, if groups are to make diversity work, they need mutually agreed upon goals, flexibility, and I'll explain this graph in a minute, flexibility in the process of reaching these goals, and an atmosphere of reciprocity and trust. And I want to pause here and say that this, from my perspective, is a very important point. We are not just talking about numbers. We are talking about bringing proverbial outsiders into the inside and into the collaborative science-making and public problem-solving process. But we're also talking about the nature of the culture we create in that problem-solving context. Structure really matters. So the example I took here and give here is the biotechnology industry. So one of the most interesting things about the biotechnology industry is that the gender gap in the production of patents is much less in certain aspects of the biotechnology industry than it is in academia. So when we look at the number of women producing patents within the academy in the U.S., it is hopelessly smaller than the number of men. When we look at the number of women, and that's what these data from a study done by Laurel Smith-Dorr and Kirsten Bunker-Whittington showed, when we look at the number of women in the biotechnology industry itself, in those cases where they create flexible, transparent networks of problem solving within the industrial setting, so flexible groups that shift and change, where people take other people's perspective, where they go from group to group and they share knowledge, women do really well in producing patents in those contexts. In the hierarchical industrial biotechnology context, which look a lot more like our typical laboratory contexts in academia, the gender gap is still there. So the notion here then is that we really need to create these collaborative relationships, both inside the context of our work and indeed expand them, as I'll talk about later, to engage the world more generally. But most importantly, what they found in that study is that not only was the experience within the group different that produced the patent gender gap going away, but the rewards within the setting were different. So collective production of innovation and science was rewarded within the flexible biotech industry as opposed to the hierarchical. And certainly we all know, at least in the US, that getting tenure, as Miriam was talking about, is very difficult when you do a lot of collaborative work, and that we have yet to learn how to reward collaborative innovation in science. But all the early studies I talked about earlier in this paper relate to the notion that really good creative problem solving happens in a collaborative, collective environment. And we know that from lots of social psychology, we know that those are environments that women thrive in. So all of these pieces go together, but we have to do a lot of institutional transformation, as NSF has been working on so beautifully, Kelly Mack down there, Wanda Ward, and others, to really get the rewards in place as well as the structure of the environment. So at Syracuse University, for example, we are in a hub of environmental regeneration. We are in upstate New York, where the after effects of industrialization are just pervasive. Superfund sites in the waters, brownfield sites on the ground, a lot of new economy work being done. And Syracuse University is an anchor in that. But what has been so important for us is that to really, and this is a picture of our new Sustainable Center of Excellence on Environmental and Energy Systems. What's important about this is it is a completely fluid, flexible, collaborative environment. It is 12 universities and some academic research centers. It is 200 firms, some of them very big and some of them very small. It is public and private sector coming together, EPA working with us on the Superfund site, and various HUD working with us on green energy efficiency building systems. And the reason I emphasize and give this as an example is this is where we've been able to align agendas for excellence. This is where we've been able to really show that recursive problem-solving cycle I talked about. But I think it relates very much to the fact that it is set up from the get-go as a collaborative, flexible, non-hierarchical, non-sectarian, if you will, that is cross-sector hub of innovation, where what's happening in the world is informing the science and innovation, and the faculty who come and work there, and there are a lot of women attracted to this now, feel like they're having some real societal impact. So as an example, one of our faculty members in civil and environmental engineering, Cliff Davidson, who came to us recently from Carnegie Mellon University, and he came to us because he could do green innovation in public problem-solving settings with real impact, and he knew he could reward his women graduate students who would really want to come with him, and they did, indeed, in quite a few numbers. So here's a picture. It's hard to see all this, or at least I can't see from here. I hope you can. This is really taking Cliff's work and showing it as that problem-solving cycle I gave in the first figure. So the problem up at the top is that the county in Onondaga County in Syracuse needed to replace a 66,000 square foot roof over its big convention center. That's 6,100 square meters. It's a massive endeavor, and they wanted to do it green. But they didn't have the expertise to do ongoing innovations. And yet here comes Cliff Davidson and his research group from the Center of Excellence, bringing in small industrial firms in upstate New York, bringing in experts from across our 12 institutions, and going on the roof with his very often female graduate students you see on the right there, and creating massive innovation, monitoring systems, and it snows a lot in upstate New York, so we monitor like crazy the storm drain runoff into the sewage plants, and it's a wonderful hub of innovation. What's most important for what I have to say today is that there is no question, and for this paper I went and interviewed several of his graduate students and doctoral students, there's no question that the women 201 in that group said that they came to this project as opposed to other projects because they could see the real societal impact and they could test whether science was something that was real in the world. Cutting-edge science, real societal impact. Another of my favorite examples of this is from Georgia Tech, where a colleague that won an award and I know well, Ellen Zaguro, is doing an amazing series of courses called Computing for Good, C4G. Some of you in computer science and engineering may know this. And the aim here is to use basic computer science design courses as a way of doing real engagement in community and public problem solving. And there again, I asked Ellen whether she had any real data on whether they're getting more women into computer science, because we all know that that's been a real bugaboo. And she said she has no hard data yet. But what she said, and I quote, is, women are attracted to technology fields when they see real-world applicability, rather than technology for technology's sake. And real-world applications are precisely what they develop in this course. So it's germinated all kinds of projects, for example, web-based tools to monitor the safety of blood supplies, a computer program to identify available shelter space for homeless individuals and families, and I could go on and on. I urge you to look on the web under C4G to see what they are doing. So when we think about how we align these structures for excellence, that is how we align public problem solving, inclusive participation, and quality innovation so that they work together, we have to really create structures that bring the talent together. And this is where, from my perspective, the advanced program has been so important that the National Science Foundation has been doing it.